Welcome to Excel and Business Math video number 38. Hey, in this video, we got to talk about date math, invoices, and cash discounts on invoices. And this is going to be an epic video because we'll get to see for the first time one of the most amazing features in Excel, date math, and the ability to make formulas based on dates. We'll also talk all about invoices. And the bulk of our calculating and the formulas that we'll see in this video will be all about calculating cash discounts. That means getting a discount if you pay your invoice early. Now we got to start off by going to the sheet Date, Number Formatting, and Calcs. The very first thing we have to do is talk about how to enter dates in Excel. Type a proper date. Now, I'm going to type today's date 3 / and there it is, a slash. As soon as I do that, I'm telling Excel this is a date. I could type a dash also, but I'm going to do a /10/2018. Now I hit Enter. Notice, as we talked about in one of the very first videos in our class, I think it was video 4, the default alignment for numbers are to the right. And so we know that when we enter a date, it's actually a number. Now, since typing today's date is so common in Excel, especially when entering historical transactions, there's the keyboard. I'm going to use the keyboard Control /. I love that. Enter. Now, we got to be careful, just as we talked about earlier in the class. If we mistakenly type 28/2/2018, I'm intending to type February 28, 2018. When I hit Enter, that shows up a line to the left, which means you know Excel thinks it's text. Now, if you have your regional settings set to show day and then month, like in some countries other than the United States, then that would be a proper date. Now, you can check your regional settings by clicking on Start button or simply hitting the Window key and then type region. And there it is, region and language. If you click on that, there it is. There's what's defining how Excel interprets dates. If you change it, for example, to German right here, you can clearly see the day is first. Now I'm going to click Escape. Now I want to notice something, and I'm going to uncollapse my ribbons up here. Right-click, uncheck the checkbox here, or use Control F1. That's a toggle for your ribbons. Notice the cell B7 has general number formatting. Watch what happens when I type a date. I'm going to use Control /. I can still see it grayed out up here, but as soon as I Control Enter, yes, when you type a date, date number formatting is applied. Now that's how to enter dates. Now let's talk about date number formatting and what's really going on. I'm going to enter today's date, Control /, and Enter. I'm going to do it again, Control /, Control Enter. Now, notice there's date. What happens if we use our eraser, the general number formatting, either from the dropdown or by using our keyboard Control-Shift-Grave-accent-tilde? What? 43,169? Yes. Date number formatting means under the dates there are serial numbers. That's the fancy word they use to describe that, which are the number of days since December 31st, 1899. That means the number 1 is actually 1/1/1900. That means the very first day in Excel's history is January 1st, 1900. Now, historians don't like this because historians use lots of dates before January 1st, 1900. But when they designed the spreadsheet, they intended people to do date math on invoices and loans and things like that. And so they didn't think that there was many invoices or loans that were outstanding before January 1st, 1900. Now let's prove this to ourselves in a different way. I'm going to type the serial number for today, 43,169, Control Enter. That's a number. I see general, but I can certainly click the drop down. And if I say short date, you got it. we applied the number formatting, and so now it's displayed as a date. So you got to know that underneath date number formatting, there are actual numbers. This is the perfect example of formatting as facade. Even though we see on the surface of the spreadsheet 3/10/2018, that number is underneath. Another thing about date number formatting, if you look up to the formula bar, and this is similar to time, you can't see what's underneath the number formatting. You see the date in the cell and up in the formula bar. It's not until you apply general that you can see that it's an actual number. Now, why is this so important? And really, why is it so amazing? It's because we can do date math. If there's actual numbers under each one of these dates, we can simply take the later date, subtract the earlier date, and it will tell us how many days between the two dates. Now, in this example, we have our invoice date and the invoice payment date. And we'd like to know how many days it took us to pay the invoice. Well, our formula for calculating the number of days between two dates, equal sign, I'm going to up arrow to get the later date minus up arrow to get the earlier date. It's always later date minus earlier date. When I hit enter, you got it, 38 days. Now, why did that work? I'm going to highlight these Control-Shift-Grave accent tilde because that formula doesn't care if we see the integers or the number formatted dates. Formulas do not see that number formatting. They always act on the underlying number. Control-Z. Here's another example. Invoice due date. And here's today. Now, I'm going to show you a new function. I could hard code like Control semicolon and enter. Later date, earlier date equals later date minus earlier date. Now, that will work. That tells me that this person is 16 days late paying their invoice. But if you want this solution to update, meaning when I open this tomorrow, I want this to say 17. The day after, I want it to say 18. We can use the today function. Equals today, tab. This is an argumentless function. You simply enter today function with two parentheses, open and close. And when I hit enter, it'll automatically give you today's date. Now, I can't open this tomorrow because I won't be filming this tomorrow. But tomorrow, this will say 3/11, and this will say 17. Here's another great date math example. Here is the loan issue date. That means the day they took out the loan. Right on the loan contract, it says what the term is, or days until loan due, 120. Well, if there are numbers underneath that date, I can simply go, hey, there's the date, and I can add a number to it. When I hit enter, it's even smart enough to know, since the cell reference touched that one first, it formats it as a date. So this loan is due on 4/29/2018. That's called the maturity date. Here's another example. We don't have to know about this one for this video, and we don't have any examples. But it's very common when you have a project start date and a project end date. Well, later date minus earlier date never includes the earlier date. So both of these calculations here, we subtracted later date minus earlier date, but it didn't include the first date. And down here for project, we definitely worked on 2/28. So the trick is equals later date minus earlier date. And since it's not going to include that one, you just add one back in. That number can be hard-coded in because it's not going to change. If you want the first day of the project to be included, you add 1. So 8 days it took us to complete this project. Now here's some other great examples. Now down here we want to learn about the EDATE and EO, that means end of month, functions. The EDATE function allows you to take any date, a serial number date, and get the same day in future or past months. EMONTH allows you to take a date and get the end of the month date for the current month, future month, or past months. Now, here's our situation. We have the invoice date, and we need to figure out the due date. And the contract says that the amount is due on the same day 2 months ahead. Now, we might try to do, hey, I know that's a date plus 60, but guess what? 2 months ahead is not always 60 days. So we can't do it that way because each month does not have exactly 30 days. That's where the EDATE function comes in. There's two arguments, the start date, comma, and then you simply say how many months forwards or backwards. If I type 2, it'll give me 2 months ahead. If I type -2, it'll give me 2 months in the past. We want 2 months, so I'm going to put 2, close parentheses, and Control Enter. Now we know that that is a serial number. We're not confused. We simply come up and apply a date number formatting. And if we change this, let's change it to 15. Instantly, it gives us 2 months ahead. Control Z. If you change it to -2, it'll go back 2 months. If I should have done -3 because it, of course, will go into the previous year. Now, F2, this function also can take 0, but for EDATE, it doesn't make any sense. Because if I put a 0 here, it would give me 3/6. We want 2, so I leave it and Enter. Now, down here, we have an invoice date, and we need to figure out the due date. EOM means end of month. The contract says that the amount is due at the end of the month. It doesn't matter what day I put here. I simply want the end of the current month equals EO. I see end of month, I hit Tab. Same two arguments. But now when I click on date, comma, and if I were to put 2, it doesn't do what EDATE does. It's going to jump 2 months ahead and give me the end of the month. Now, this is not what we want here, but we'll take a look. Come up to the drop down, short date. Oh, so it went to 3/4 and gave me the end of the month. If I were to say -2, doesn't matter. It goes back 2 months. 1/12 gives me the end of the month. The beautiful thing about this EOMONTH is that many times we just want the end of the current month. That means do not jump any months forwards or backwards. Stay in the current month. When I hit Enter, whoa! And it knows leap year, because, of course, that is a leap year. If I change this to 1, it totally gets it. Control Z. Another invoicing date problem we're going to run into is we have the invoice date. That's the day that the invoice was issued. And we need to jump to the end of the month, but that's not when it's due. We need to find the end of the current month and then go 10 days into the next month. So we can use equals end of month. There's the date, comma, 0, close parentheses. That will give me part of what I want. Drop down for date. F2, now I simply need to add 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to 10. That's the correct date. And we'll use the end of the month function exactly like that when we do a few of our cash discounts. Now we have one last example on this sheet. Our goal is to create a formula that will automatically tell you how many days an invoice is overdue. Here's the customer. Here's the amount they owe. And here are the invoice due dates. That's when they were supposed to be paid. And we need to figure out how many days late each one of these is. Well, I'm going to use the today function because I want this to update when I open it tomorrow. It'll automatically put the day I'm filming the video. Double click and send it down. So we get the same day all the way down. Now I do my formula to calculate number of days between two dates equals later date minus earlier date. Control Enter. Wow, 9 days late. Double click and send it down. I'm going to go to the last cell and hit F2. So we have our number of days late. It looks like the number one slackered right there, 597.07, 74 days late. Tomorrow when we open this, this will update. And if they haven't paid, that will say 75. So here we used a date function, and we used the base formula for calculating number of days, later date minus earlier date. Now, we saw a number of date calculations, including EDATE and end of month, and our basic formulas for doing date math. Now, we're going to use what we learned here, date number formatting and date math, to solve common invoicing problems when we calculate the amount that is due on an invoice. Now, before we can look at the calculations, we want to go over to the sheet Invoice. Now, this is an example of an invoice selling boomerangs. In fact, this Bellin wholesale cost is what we calculated last video. Now, we want to look at this invoice and talk about the different parts. This is the seller up at the top. Right here, this is the buyer. So Gel Boomerangs is selling some wholesale boomerangs to Kite Flight. Here's the invoice number. Here's the invoice date. A lot of our calculations will be based off the invoice date. Now we have our products quantity, price each, line item total. There's the subtotal. There's the shipping, and there's the total. Now when we go to calculate a discount, we're going to base it off of the subtotal amount. We have shipping, but if it had shipping, insurance, tax, none of those things get a discount. Only the subtotal for all the products sold. Now, shipping terms, shipping point, we got to figure out what that means, and terms. This tells us when the invoice is due and whether or not we can earn a cash discount. Now, this is read 115 net 45. That means you get a 1% discount if you pay within 15 days of the invoice date. Otherwise, you have to pay the full amount with no discount within 45 days of the invoice date. Now, before we talk about calculating cash discounts, I want to go talk about shipping and tax. So let's go over to the sheet, shipping terms. Now, FOB, what does that mean? Free on board. But really, we want to distinguish between FOB destination and FOB shipping point. What we saw in the invoice just a second ago and all of our examples in this class will be shipping point. Now, destination means the seller retains ownership of the goods until they reach the destination. At the destination, ownership of the goods transfer to the buyer. This means the seller pays the shipping charges, and if there's damage during shipping, the seller has to record a loss. That means for shipping point, it's the opposite. Ownership of goods transfers to the buyer prior to shipment. And usually this means when the goods are handed to the shipping company. The company I used to run, we sold boomerangs to other stores, so we did FOB shipping point. So as soon as I handed the box of boomerangs over to UPS, it became the buyer's products. That meant the buyer paid the shipping costs, and if there's damage during shipping, that means UPS wrecked it, the buyer records a loss. Now, of course, the buyer would go after UPS or have insurance or something like that. COD, that means cash on delivery. FAS, that means free alongside. Goods are delivered to the dock with all the freight charges paid. Any remaining charges are paid by the buyer. So it's split. Now, a few times while running Gel Boomerangs, we actually bought wood directly from Finland. And so it was shipped over on a boat, and it took a long time. But all of the boat charges were paid by the company from Finland. But we had to hire a truck to go pick it up and bring it to the manufacturing facility. So that's free alongside. Also note, some businesses will record shipping on the sales invoice and some will not. And in fact, at Gel Boomerangs, when we got the wood, we always got a separate shipping invoice. But many other times, shipping is included on the invoice. In this class, all the examples we have, shipping is on the invoice. Now let's go talk about sales tax, because sometimes it's hard to tell exactly who pays the sales tax. Now, the rule is simple. Sales tax is only paid by the final customer. When the item bought has made it to the final destination, sales tax must be paid. Tax is paid on retail price. Well, most of the time. Tax is not paid on wholesale price unless the business pays at wholesale and uses it in its business. Thus, it becomes the final customer. Here's the example. The company I used to run, Gel Boomerang, we would buy paint and paint equipment from the paint store. Well, guess what? The paint was going to be used to paint the boomerang. So, of course, we bought it at wholesale and did not pay tax. But the spray equipment that we bought, we got a big discount because we buy wholesale from this company all the time. We did not pay retail price. But because the paint equipment had reached its final destination, even though we paid a wholesale cost, we still had to pay tax. All right, that's important to know, although for our examples in this video, we don't have any examples with tax. Now, we need to go over and talk about cash discounts. So I'm going to click on the sheet, Cash Discounts. Now, what is a cash discount? It's a discount on the invoice total if the invoice is paid early. Now, cash discounts are discounts that are offered on invoices to encourage the purchaser to pay quickly. Said a different way, they are incentive to pay the invoice total early. Now, I keep saying total, but cash discounts are applied to the subtotal for product purchase only. So here's the subtotal, not including shipping, tax, insurance, and things like that. Now, there are many different types of cash discounts, and you always have to read your contract carefully. But we will look at these methods: the ordinary, the end of month, as of, and receipt of goods. Now, the big confusion when people are learning these different discounts for the first time is confusing trade discounts with cash discounts. Trade discounts, discounts applied to list price in order to calculate wholesale cost. Totally different when we get to cash discounts. Offer of a discount on the invoice total as an incentive to pay the bill early. So guess what? 1372, we learned how to calculate that with the trade discount last video. But that trade discount just helped us go from list price to an individual wholesale cost for a product. So trade discounts help us get to wholesale cost. Cash discounts are a discount on our subtotal on our invoice if we pay early. Now, let's learn how to determine if we get a cash discount and how to calculate them correctly. Let's go over to the sheet O1. O is for ordinary. All right, so ordinary dating cash discount method. Here it is, 2, 10, net 30. The red 2, that means that's the cash discount percentage. 2 means 2% discount on the invoice total without shipping, tax, insurance, and so on, if paid within 10 days of the invoice date. So these two numbers are linked. That's the 2% discount, and the 10 is number of days to take the discount. So 10 means if you pay within 10 days of the invoice date, you get a 2% discount. Then the net 30, number of days until the invoice is considered late. Net 30 means if you do not pay invoice total within 30 days of the invoice date, a late fee may apply. Again, you have to read your contract. That kind of stuff is all over the map. Now, in our class, we're going to do all of the examples where we actually either get the discount or don't get the discount. We won't do any calculations in this video for past due and then calculating finance fees. All right, now let's see how to use this 210 net 30. There's an example down below. Now, the 2 part, that's the cash discount. So we write that here, and I'm going to write the decimal 0.02. That means 2 pennies for every $1 is going to be our discount. Number of days to take the discount, that's the 10. So we have 10 days from the invoice date in order to pay and get the discount. Number of days until the invoice is considered late, that's the net 30. So I put a 30 here. I've already entered invoice total. This is the date on the invoice, and this is the date that we paid the invoice. Now we have a number of calculations, and we're going to start off by asking, what's the last day to earn a discount? Well, they told us we have 10 days from the invoice date. Well, luckily in Excel, we can simply do date math equals, there's the invoice date. And all I have to do is add that 10. So when I hit Enter, we have until 3/10/2018. Now we can clearly see with our eyes that if we paid on the 10th and we had until the 10th, we do get the discount. Yes, indeed. If you pay exactly on last day to earn a discount, you do get the discount. Now we might also want to calculate the final due date. Well, they told us 30 days from the invoice date. So we say equals invoice date plus 30 days. And when I hit Enter, we better pay before 3/30 or else we might get a late fee. Now, we can see that we get the discount. But eventually, we want our formulas to see for us and calculate for us. So now we want to calculate how many days between payment date and invoice date. This is the perfect job for later date minus earlier date. So you ready? Equals, that's the later date. That means the day we paid minus the invoice date. That's the earlier date. And Enter. So now we have a 10 here. That's how many days it took us to pay. Now, in order to determine whether we get the discount, you can either compare last day to earn the discount and your payment date, meaning we're comparing date to date, or you can calculate how many days it took you to pay and compare that to number of days to take the discount. Now, I'm going to do it both ways in this example, but later I usually use the actual number of days and compare it to the days they gave us. Now, that means we're going to see both ways to ask the question, is cash discount earned? Have we paid in 10 or fewer days? First, I'm going to take the number of days it took us to pay, and I'm going to ask the question, is that less than or equal to the hurdle, number of days they gave us? Right now, 10 is equal to 10, so that will come out true. That's the first way, comparing these two numbers. Now let's compare these two dates. Equals, is the day we paid less than or equal to the final day to get our discount? Both will give us true. Both methods will give you the same exact answer. Now we can see visually that it says true, so now we can calculate our discount. 500 times 0.02. We definitely run the risk of extraneous decimals. We're definitely using money, and we're definitely going to use this discount amount in a subsequent formula, so we have to use round. 500 bucks. Notice there's $500 in there, and we have to multiply it by the 2 pennies they're going to give us as a discount for every $1, comma, 2, because we're rounding to the penny, close parentheses. Control Enter, and we get 10 bucks. Now, the amount to pay equals the full amount of the invoice. We don't have any shipping or anything that we have to add, so all we have to do is subtract the discount. And when I hit Enter, 490 bucks. That's the discounted invoice total that we have to send in. Now, I'm going to zoom in here a bit, and we want to test this. I want to come up and change 310 to 311. And when I hit Enter, these are telling us false. But sure enough, this did not update. Since it's false, that really should be the full invoice amount. So let's change this formula F2. Since we want one of two things, either this subtraction to get the discounted amount, or we want 500, we can use the if function. Now, we're going to assume with the if function that we already have all of these cells here. So guess what? I'm totally allowed for logical test to click on a cell that gives me true or false, comma. If that comes out true, then I want the discounted amount, comma. Otherwise, the value if false, that's the 500. Close parentheses and Enter. Wow, so now it's 500. If I change this back to 310, just like that, it updates. Now, sometimes we definitely want to do it in these steps and see the intermediate steps. But sometimes we want just a single formula to tell us the amount to pay. The trick is going to be we need one of two things in the cell. I either need the full amount or I need the discounted amount. Now, before we do our if formula and put discounted amount or full amount, let's come off to the side and make it easy on ourselves and see if we can calculate in a single cell the actual discounted amount. Because up here we did it in 2 steps. We calculated the discount and then subtracted the discount from the 500. Well, no problem. We've been studying percentages and decimals so often in this class. We know that when we're given 2% or 0.02, that's 2 parts for every 100. That means 2 pennies of discount we get. But if we take 2 pennies of discount, that means we're really paying 98 pennies for every $1 in that $500 amount. So let's come down here, and we have to use round. I'm going to take 500 bucks times, and not the 2%, but in parentheses 1 minus the 2%. Because, of course, 1 minus 0.02 will give us 98 pennies. So we're multiplying 98 pennies times the 500, comma 2, close parentheses, and enter. So 490. That's the formula element. And I'm actually going to copy this in edit mode, Control-C. That's going to be one of the 2 things that we put into that cell. Enter. Now I'm going to come up to this cell, and we're going to use the if function. And we have to, in the logical test, build our entire logical test. We need to compare our 10 days that it took us to pay and see if it's less than or equal to the hurdle. Well, how did I calculate that 10? I took payment date minus invoice date. That will give us our number of days to pay. And we ask the question, hey, are you less than or equal to the hurdle? If that comes out true, comma, value if true, the discounted amount. Now, I already copied it, so when I Control-V, there's the whole value if true. Now I come to the end, comma, value if false, that's the 500. So we have either 500 or 490, all based on our logical test. Now close parentheses and enter. If I come up and change this to 11 and hit enter, they're both working. If I were to highlight all of these and remove them, that's going to work every time. Change this to a 10, and just like that, our single cell formula is working. Now Control-Z, Z, and I'm going to delete that one there. All right. So on this sheet, we saw our first example of the ordinary dating method, 210 net 30, and we saw a few different options for calculating the final invoice amount. Now we want to go over to the sheet O2. Now here's our invoice, and the terms for this invoice are 115 net 45. So we need to take these formula inputs and put them into the cells. So for cash discount, that's 1%. Now notice it's already pre-formatted, so the percentage comes up. Number of days to take the discount, that's the 15, so I put a 15. Number of days until the invoice is late, that's the net 45, so I put 45 and enter. Invoice date, I'm going to say equal sign and just grab it right from the invoice and enter. There's the day we paid. Now let's first calculate last day to earn a discount. There's the invoice date. They give us 15 days, so we simply equals, there's the invoice date plus 15, and enter. So 3/6. Again, we can pick this out visually, seeing that, in fact, we did get the discount, but we want to make it automatic. How about days between date paid and invoice date? That'll tell us how many days it took us to pay the invoice. Later date minus earlier date, and enter. So it took us 14 days. Is the discount earned? Paid 15 or fewer days? Well, let's find out. Number of days to pay the invoice. Are you less than or equal to the number of days they gave us? Of course, that'll come out true. Now I'm going to grab the invoice subtotal equals, and there it is right there, enter. Amount of the discount. Well, we do get the discount, so we're going to take this times 1%. and we are going to round. So round. There's invoice subtotal times 1%, comma 2, close parentheses, and enter. Shipping, I'm just going to get that from the invoice because we can't forget that. This one has shipping, and we cannot calculate the discount on that. Now the amount to pay equals, there's the full invoice amount minus the discount plus the shipping. Notice we had to do two things: subtract the discount and add shipping. So there it is, 839.77 pennies. Now, of course, we got to test it to make sure it works. So if I change this to the 7th, there's a false, but we still got a discount. So let's fix this one. F2. What do we want? One of two things, either the round or 0. So I'm going to, right after the equal sign, if. Since I already have a true false in the cell, that's going to be my logical test, comma. Logical test, value if true, comma, 0. That means no discount. Close parentheses and Control Enter. Now if I test this, we're going to change this to the 5th. And there we go. This is 833, and this is reduced, taking into account shipping and discount. Now, if we want to do this all in one cell, we definitely can do that. And I'm going to do it a slightly different way this time because we do have shipping. I'm going to start off just to see if I can get the amount of the discount to come out 833 or 0. Because let's look at this final formula. Minus the discount. Well, if that cell is either 833 or 0, that will work fine. So we literally can put down here the total for the invoice minus, and that'll be our if, either 0 or the discount, plus the shipping. All right, let's try it down here. I'm going for the discount. Round, and I want just the discount amount, and I want to do it off the invoice amount. So I'm either using these numbers up in the white or these numbers over here, times the 1%, comma 2, close parentheses. That will give us the 833, but I need to build the logical test to use 833 or 0. If the logical test, I'm going to build it right in the cell. I need to figure out how many days it took me to pay, so I subtract payment minus invoice date. Then I need to compare it. Are you less than or equal to the hurdle of 15, comma. So we have our logical test, true or false. That's what we want for the discount. If it comes out true, comma 0, that's the value of false. Control Enter. Now if I test this up here, 7. All right, so that's working. We're just going to think of that whole if as that. We'll put the invoice amount and the shipping, and we will have our formula, F2. So right at the beginning, I'm going to say, hey, full invoice amount minus, that whole thing is just the discount. And then come to the end, plus the shipping. Control Enter. And so now if I change this to 5, everything should be working. If I clear all of this, that is working. If I change this to 7, it better give me the entire amount. Control Z, Z. All right, so our second example of ordinary, still we had just a single offer of a discount. In our third example of ordinary, we'll see 2 discounts. I'm going to click on the sheet O3. Now, in this invoice, the terms list 2, 15, 130. That means you get a 2% discount if you pay within 15 days, 1% if you pay within 30 days, otherwise paying 45. Now, I've entered all of the information here, including there are clearly 2 different situations. Discount rate number 1, number of days to get that discount rate. Here's discount number 2. If we miss the 15 days, then within 30 days you get a 1%. Otherwise, if we pay between 30 and 45, we won't get any discount. All right, so here's the day we paid, and here's the invoice date. We'll simply calculate how many days it took us to pay, later date minus the earlier date. So it took us 17 days. Now, since we have two rates and we eventually want to automate this, we're actually going to have to check two different things. First, we have to check whether we got the discount earned based on 15 or fewer days, and then 30 or fewer days. Well, that's no problem. We just have to compare the number of days that it took us to pay and ask the question, are you less than or equal to the first hurdle of 15? Now we have to do a different logical test. We're still looking at number of days, but now we're asking the question, hey, are you less than or equal to the next hurdle, which is 30? In this case, we get a true. So that means our rate that we get to use for discounting is 1 penny for every dollar. Now, discount to use, I'm simply going to say equals and click on that 1%. Enter. Amount of the discount equals the round. I'm going to come over to the invoice and get the subtotal amount times the 1%, comma 2, close parentheses, and enter. So the amount to pay, and I'm coming over to the invoice to get subtotal minus the discount plus our shipping, and enter. Now let's test it. If I come up here and change this to 1, now we get a true here, so we definitely should be using the 2%, but we're not. If I change it to 30, we should be getting no discount at all. That doesn't say 0, and that doesn't say 0 either. Now I'm going to Control Z to put it back to 3.8. Now, this is the first time in the class where we've had a cell that's getting one of three things in the cell. I either want 2%, 1%, or 0. Now, we know that when we have one of two things in the cell, we use the if function. If you have one of three things, then you have to use two if functions together. So this will be the first time we get to see this. All right, equals if. And I'm going to use these true falses here. The first test, if we paid in fewer than 15 days. That's the logical test. Comma. Well, if we have, we get 2%, comma. Otherwise, value if false. Now, here's the trick. Here's how you know when you have to use two ifs. You ask the question, well, how many things are left? I still have two things, either 1% or 0. So guess what? Right in the value if false, we're going to put a second if. That second if will dump one of two things into value if false. Now, we'll go watch Formula Evaluator after we're done and prove that that actually does happen. So we still have two possible things left, so I put a second if. Now, the logical test, that's this true or false in that cell. If that comes out true, comma, then what do I want? 1%, comma. Otherwise, there's only one thing left, so I put it there, 0. Now watch this. I'm going to have to close parentheses, but notice that parentheses is not black, so I keep typing parentheses till I see the black, and I know I'm done. So close parentheses and enter. Now, here's the big moment. Let's test it. I'm going to come up here, and when I change this to 1, I can clearly see this is 10, which is less than 15. That says true, and sure enough, our double if is delivering 2%. Now I'm going to change this to 30. Enter. And sure enough, it delivers a 0. Now we have built a formula that can put one of three things into the cell. Now I'm going to change this back to 8, and I want to go look at how this formula calculates. So this is the discount to use. It's got that double if. Let's come up to formulas, over to formula auditing, evaluate formula. The underline means it's going to evaluate it. You either click evaluate or hit enter. When I hit enter, it sees false. Now it immediately jumps inside the second if, because it knows it can't put H6 in there. So it's trying to evaluate what's sitting in value if false. But this is the second if, so it looks in there. It sees a true. Now it can evaluate the entire if which means it has to look in H8. So I hit Enter. There's H8. So the second if dumped H8 into the first if. Now, since it says false, it's not going to take value if true. It's going to take value if false. So when I hit Enter, there's the 1%. And Enter. Now I'm going to change this and do it one other way. I'm going to change this to 30. So now it's evaluating to the 0. So let's click on Evaluate Formula. It's looking. It sees a false. Now it goes to the second if. It sees a false. Now it's going to get that 0. And sure enough, the second if dumped a 0 into the value of false of the first if. And now it'll evaluate and dump a 0. So we have the multi-step method working. The only trick is how in the world are we going to put that all into one cell? Well, same way, F2. Remember, we're just going to need to do the hard part, which is this if. Now, I'm going to start off by trying to build this whole double if without these two cells. So you ready? Equals if. Well, the first logical test is I need to test if we paid in under 15 days. Well, I got to get number of days, so I say the day I paid minus the invoice date. And then I have to ask, are you less than or equal to the first hurdle? So that's our first logical test. Comma. If that's true, well, I need 2%. Comma. Value if false. Remember, since we have two things left, I have to use a second if. So I type if. Oh, I'm going to have to do the same test on the 30 days. So I say later date minus earlier date. And I ask the question, are you less than or equal to the second hurdle? That's the second logical test. If that comes out true, because the first one came out false and it came to this one, then value of true, that's the 1%. Comma. Otherwise, if both logical tests came out false, then please throw a 0 into the cell. Close parentheses, close parentheses. I see the black one and Control Enter. Now let's test it. I'm going to try 1, and it better give me 2%, and it does. Change it to 8, and it better give me 1%. Now I'm going to hit F2. That whole big, huge thing, it's just delivering the discount rate. So now at the very beginning, I'm going to click on the invoice amount and times. That will give me the correct discount, but it's not rounded. So right after the equal sign, I type round tab. That whole scary thing is just the discount that needs to be rounded. So I come to the end, comma 2, close parentheses, Control Enter. So 833. Let's test it. I'm going to come up here and change this to 30. Better be 0. Change this to 1, and it better be 1666. Wow, that's amazing. That whole thing, F2, that's just the discount. So now we continue on. There's the subtotal minus the discount. And then I come to the end, plus the shipping. Control Enter. Now I come up and I'm going to change it. 30 and Control Enter. Totally working. Change it to 8. And that is amazing. Now, when you're doing a test or doing this on your own, by all means, if you want to do the multi-step method, then do it that way. If you want to try and do it that way and then mash it all together, you can do that also. Now, we want to look at a few other methods of calculating cash discount. We have as of and receipt of goods. Now, I'm going to click on the as of answer sheet and look. Guess what? This will be easy because the only difference between as of date cash discount method and the ordinary dating cash date method is you don't use the invoice date, you use the as of date. That means prominently on the invoice, it will say, please use as of date rather than the invoice date. So that means for all your calculation like number of days, you don't take payment minus invoice, you take payment minus as of date. All the rest of the calculations are the same. If we go over to the receipt of goods answer sheet, it's the same thing. The terms will clearly say you're supposed to use receipt of goods date rather than the invoice date. That means the day you received the goods. Now, there's one other thing. If you see 210 ROG, wait a second, there's no net here. Now, I want to go look at the PDF notes on page 8 in the ordinary method for calculating cash discounts. There's a note here. If no net is given, it's assumed to be 20 days past the discount period. And that's for all the different methods, whether it's ordinary, as of, receipt of goods, and even end of month. So back over here, it says 210 ROG. That means the net is 20 days past whatever the last day is for the discount. So when we calculate up here, number of days until the invoice is late, we just hard code the 20. That's the number of days we were given past the receipt of goods date to take our discount. So we simply add 20. That means if you see a 10 here, you know net is 30. All the other calculations are the same, except for the one calculation where instead of using the invoice date, you use receipt of goods. Here's the answer sheet. You can go ahead and try that over here. Now, we got to talk about our last cash discount method. I'm going to click on the EOM sheet because it's a lot different than the ordinary dating method. Here's what your invoice terms will say. 315 EOM. The 3, that's the same as it has always been. Cash discount percent. 3 means 3% discount on invoice total. The 15, last day in the month to earn a discount. And this gets crazy. The 15 means if the day number in the invoice date is less than 26, that means, for example, down here, the invoice date is 19. That's less than the 26th of the month. So the 15 will mean if your invoice day is less than 26, the last day to earn a discount is the 15th of next month. Otherwise, if the day number in the invoice date is 26 days or more, the last day to earn a discount is the 15th of 2 months ahead. And the final due date, since there's no net day, that EOM without net means you must calculate the final day to pay the invoice without a late payment by adding 20 days to the last day to earn a discount date. Now, that sounds pretty confusing, but there's all the rules right here. And as we step through, it'll make more sense. So there's our terms. 315 end of month. We list our 3%. There's the 15th of either next month or 2 months ahead. There's the invoice date, and there's the day we paid. Now, the very first thing we have to do is we always have to look and see what is the day in the month. It should be 19 here. Over in the second example, it's 26. So can we automate that? You betcha, because luckily they named this function smartly. They named it the day function. And also luckily, we know what a serial number is. We click on whatever the serial number date is, and it will always just pick out the day. Now, if we eye this, we can see we're under the hurdle of 26. So that means we need to jump to next month, from February to next month, and it would be the 15th. Now, notice it gives you the 15 from the end of the month. So we're in February. So guess what? I'm going to jump down here, and we need to calculate the last day in the month to earn a discount. And the way we do this is we use the end of month function. We click on the invoice date, comma 0, because our goal is to go to the end of this month. If I enter this, you can see in 2018, February has 28 days, F2, and we add the 15. So there is the last day that we're allowed to get a discount. Now, if we look at our term, since it doesn't say net something something, we simply take that date and add 20. So the final due date is whatever the last day to earn a discount is, plus hard-coded in 20. So we have our two dates. If we pay by 3/15, we get the discount. Otherwise, we have to pay by April 4th. Now we can eye our example here, and we can see we have not paid before this discount date. Now I want to F2 on the formula with our end of month. And I want to notice we put a 0 into months. That will always be the case when the day is less than 26. Now I want to come over to our second example over here. The invoice day is the 26th. And I want to do our same couple of calculations. We're going to start with what is the day of our invoice date. That tells us 26th. Eyeing it, I know that I get the discount. So I'm going to come down. This is the last day in the month to earn a discount. So I say end of month. And there's the invoice date. But comma, instead of jumping 0 to the end of February, I need to add a 1 here to jump to the end of next month. So I put a 1, close parentheses. If I enter that, that gives me March 31st. But I know it's 15 days past that. So I add the 15 and enter. Now I can equals that plus 20. So for this invoice where the day is 26, 4/15. We have until April 15th. Otherwise, pay by the 5th of May. Now, I want to try and automate this. So no matter what date I put here, everything will work. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to notice that anytime the day in the month is 26 or later, the end of the month needs a 1. Over here, the day is less than 26. End of the month is going to get 0. That means the month's argument in end of month needs one of two things, 0 or 1. That sounds like the perfect job for the if function. Now, let's do the logical test, and actually, we're going to see something even better than the if function. We still need one of two things. End of month needs 0 or 1. But let's build our logical test smartly and then see if we can adapt it. Now, our logical test is going to be, is the day, that means whatever the day function spits out, is it 26 or bigger? Another way to say that is, hey, whatever day puts out, are you greater than or equal to the hurdle? When I hit enter, that will give me false. Now, our end of month needs 0. So watch this trick. Anytime we have a true, false, logical value, we can convert a false to 0 and a true to 1 by adding 0. So I'm going to say, hey, whatever's in that cell, logical value, please add 0. When I hit enter, it turns that to 0. If I were to come up here and change this to 26, watch what happens. True, add 0, it becomes 1. So we can use that 0, 1 rather than our if. Put it inside of end of month, and end of month will always know to jump to the end of this month or next month. Now I'm going to change this back, Control Z, and now we want to come F2 and highlight 0 and click on our cell with either 0 or 1 and enter. So now it's the 15th. When I change this to the 26th, it's totally working. True, this is a 1 that feeds into end of month, and it gives us 4/15, and there's the final due date. And we need to Control Z. Our next task is to determine if we earned a discount. That means we have to compare that date to when we paid our invoice. No problem. I'm going to say equals our payment date. Are you less than or equal to last day to earn a discount? Right now, it's false. Let's change this to 26 and enter. Now it's true. Now we have to calculate the amount of discount given that it's true. I'm going to use the round function. There's the invoice subtotal times our 3%, comma 2, close parentheses. Now, right now, it is not linked to that true and false, because what we really want in this cell is either $24.99 or 0. Now, no problem. We could use the if function. But we saw up here how we can convert true and false to 1 and 0. Now, up here, we added 0. But any math operation will convert true and false, true to 1, false to 0. Well, how about that right there? That's $24.99 right now. What would happen if we multiplied that by false or 0? It would be 0. What if we multiplied it by true or 1? 1 would not change it at all. So instead of using the if here, we're going to just take our logical test, which happens to be right there in the cell, and we're going to multiply it straight across. By using the result of the logical test, that will be 1 or 0. Now I can Control-Enter. $24.99. If I change this to 19 and hit Enter, now it is 0. That's exactly what we want. Now we can finish our formula equals, there's the invoice subtotal, minus the amount of discount, plus the shipping. When I hit Enter, that should work. Now, no matter what date I put up here, the 19th, it gives us no discount. If I change it to 26 and Enter, now we have the discount. And there's the correct amount to pay. Now I'm going to Control-Z. Just for practice, let's do this again over here. We're first going to ask the question, is the day bigger than the hurdle? Equals, there's the day. Are you greater than or equal to? We got to include the equals and Enter. Now we want to add 0 to this to convert it, in our case, to 1. And if it turns out to be false, it'll convert it to 0. And Enter. Now I'm going to link F2, the end of the month. Right in month's argument, I'm clicking on that cell with the 0 or 1. And Enter. Now I want to come down here. Did we earn a discount? We have to compare our payment date. Are you less than or equal to the last day to get the discount? This comes out true. Amount of the discount. Well, I definitely have to use the round. I'm going to take invoice subtotal times the 3%. And now I'm going to times the true-false value, comma 2, close parentheses, and Enter. Now we can calculate amount to pay equals, and I'm going to get subtotal minus the discount plus the shipping, and Enter. If I change this up here, 19 and Enter. Everything is working. Control-Z. All right, that was a wild cash discount method, end of month. Now, for this video, there are a lot of homework problems. There's 1 to 17 amazing homework problems for you to practice with. Now, in this video, we talked about invoice totals. And when we're given terms like 315 end of month, we have the opportunity to earn a discount. A cash discount is subtracted from the invoice subtotal. Now, we talked about end of month on this sheet and saw the end of month function. And we saw some calculations where we're actually taking true, false values and using them in formulas. We were able to, on this sheet, calculate the final invoice amount to pay. On the ROG sheet, we talked about receipt of goods. On the as of sheet, we talked about as of. Over on O3, we talked about what to do when you're given terms where you're offered multiple discounts and you have to pick the correct one for the calculation. Over on O2, we saw how to use our terms from an invoice and calculate the amount to pay. Over on O1, we introduced ourselves to ordinary dating cash discount method. We talked about cash discounts. We talked about sales tax, shipping terms. We looked at an invoice, and we started it all off talking about date number formatting and date math. Now, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun, including next video, number 39. We'll actually build the invoice from scratch. All right, we'll see you next video.